So I'll be the talking podium here, hiding behind this giant box. I also want to thank Pacific Life and all the organizers who did such a great job with this and for inviting me and putting on such a great workshop. So I'm going to jump right into it. What I just want to do today briefly, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, is give you an overview of some of the scales at which we see cetacean variability that we've documented over the years, and then go over some of the habitat-based models of cetacean density that a team of researchers at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center has been working on, looking at it both historical from surveys we've done 91 to 2008, and then looking also at our ability to predict sort of in a nowcast and forecast sense what cetaceans might be doing out there based on oceanic variability. That way it's supposed to point. I want to point out that this was work done by a huge team of people, and there are a number of publications that I'm going to be drawing from. I won't give you a quiz on these references later, but if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to give them to you. But again, this is not my work, this is the work of a large team. Whoops. There. So just to remind everyone that the California current ecosystem has a very diverse assemblage of cetaceans, and I probably have the numbers wrong because the taxonomy keeps changing, but roughly 27 species, probably a couple extra beaked whales that have yet to be described. But it is a very diverse assemblage, including temperate and tropical species and migratory species, as well as resident animals. So this leads to, it sets the stage for a lot of variation, and this cartoon here illustrates at various scales the type of variation that we can see. On the left I have an example of a temperate species, Dulse porpoise, that depending on whether we're in a cool phase or a warm phase, the range of that animal might contract or expand. So in cool periods, this animal might go farther south. In warm periods, conversely, we tend to see tropical species farther north, and we get some interesting patterns of change within the California current. Whoops, wrong way. This way. So if we look, for example, in this overlap area at how that might manifest itself if we're looking locally, and I'm sorry, this is not Southern California, but it's a nice illustration of a paper that was published in 2002. This is a series of surveys, monthly surveys during the summertime upwelling period and from May through November, spanning the El Nino and La Nina that we just talked about, very strong El Nino, La Nina signal. And you don't need to see all the details of the species, but I just want you to know the warm colors, the reds and oranges, are tropical species, whereas as blue colors are the colder water species. And we can see that during the El Nino, there was a dramatic influx of these warm water species into Monterey Bay within that overlap zone. So if we're looking at things locally, we can see quite dramatic shifts. If we look at a larger scale, this is a map showing 6 surveys we've conducted within the California current system for marine mammals and blue whale sighting locations. And the top panel are within the 90s, 91, 93, 96. The lower panel are in the 2000s, 2001, 2005, 2008. And we see a pretty dramatic difference in the numbers of sightings, particularly in the area circled in red off the coast of Southern California. And so these are shifts that we see both the interannual signal from year to year, but I would also say that we can see that in the 90s the distribution of blue whales was quite dramatically different than 2000s. And John Kelambikidis and Jay and others have published on this in terms of where are the blue whales. They haven't declined, but they've changed their distribution basically out of our study area. So one thing that we've done to try to help us understand this mishmash of patterns that we observe is to develop species environment models that can help us explain some of this variability. And I just briefly want to state up front, there are different types of models for different purposes. And the Cadillac, the one we'd all like to be doing, are these mechanistic trophic models where we can say, okay, the wind blows, we get mesoscale features developing, we get zooplankton and fish, and the upper trophic level predators come in. And this has been successfully done for a few species, notably those that feed fairly low on the trophic level, whales that feed on krill, for instance, such as the Fiedler et al. Study and the Kroll et al. Study of blue whales, and also right whales in the Atlantic. There's some nice studies. Unfortunately, that's not what I'm going to be talking about. Another type of model are explanatory models. These are things that can help us explain variation within the data set to improve our analysis, basically, and our statistical power to identify patterns. And there's another reference there, and again, that's not what I'm going to be talking about. The third type of model are predictive models, and this is indeed what we've been working on. And the idea is to identify persistent relationships between species and habitat variables to to allow fine-scale predictions of where we're going to see what, basically, what species and how abundant they're going to be. And I want to emphasize that those predictors, those habitat variables, are not necessarily what we'd like zooplankton, what we're eating, but they tend to be proxies that we can measure readily and see if we can identify those patterns that are stable through time. So this is the type of model that we have. The basic idea, I won't go into the nitty-gritty, but we developed these in the framework of generalized average models. We take our marine mammal survey data and on the left there, and then we combine it with habitat data on the right. This includes both remotely sensed data and things sampled oceanographically from the ship's surface information and at depth when we can, mixed, bongo toe there or mixed layer depth and so on. And we develop from these habitat association plots, and I'll focus on the left, the California current ecosystem. We can develop plots from that. The red colors show areas of predicted higher density of this particular species. The blue colors are areas of lower predicted density, and the black dots are where we actually saw them. And I'll be showing you a series of plots like this, but these models can help us understand that variability at a finer scale than just looking at dots on a map. So this is an example for the short-beaked common dolphin, one of the most abundant delphinids in the California ecosystem. And those are those same 6 surveys that we covered within the California current. And it shows the predicted densities. Again, reds are higher densities, blues are lower densities, and then the black dots show where we actually had sightings. Bigger dots mean more animals. And we can see some variation in that, and I don't have the pointer again, but what I wanted to point out is if you look at this map, you can see that there is some variation. In particular, if you compare 1993, where the animals were very close, that tucked in closer to shore, to 2001, where there's a conspicuous absence of predicted animals and observed animals within the Central California region. And so we can describe some of that variability using these models. In this case, the model was fairly complex. It had depth, sea surface temperature, CV of sea surface temperature, which is a proxy for frontal regions, salinity, mixed layer depth, and chlorophyll. Some of the other species have even simpler relationships. Dall's porpoise is one of my favorite because you can do a pretty good job explaining where you're going to see them using just depth, slope, and sea surface temperature. And again, these are the predicted density maps for all the different years of Dall's porpoise. And if you, again, compare 93 and 96, you see dramatic differences in total numbers and distribution, similarly 2005. So we've captured some of that variation. What we can do with these over time then is develop, if you will, a climatology of cetacean density across years. And these 4 panels on the right, we basically get averages and variation among the different years. The 4 panels show the top left is the average density across those years. And I kind of like the 2 on the bottom. These are the lower and upper 90th percentiles. And if you compare those, you can kind of see where the greatest amount of variation in the distribution of these animals is, or at least has been historically. And that last point is kind of important because it still doesn't tell us about what's going to happen tomorrow or next year. And that's what I want to get into a little bit here. So the other question we had, and this is work that Elizabeth Becker has in a paper in press right now, and I should mention that both Jay and Elizabeth are here in the audience, so if you have any questions, I'll make them answer later. But we wanted to see whether we could use some near real-time satellite products or forecast models like the regional ocean circulation model to actually predict where we would see animals on scales of days, weeks, or months. So the nowcast, I'm just going to jump right into the results. This was a case where Elizabeth took the September 1st, 2008 sea surface temperature image, and that grist product that was just on the previous slide is a blended product that can deal with clouds. So it's a cloud-free product. We have for every location, we can actually get a sea surface temperature prediction. These are 2 species that have good relationships with sea surface temperature. On the left are striped dolphins, a warm water species, and on the right are Dall's porpoise. And what is shown again are the predicted densities in that red to blue color scheme, along with actual transect lines and sighting locations during September of 2008, during a new survey. And so we can see that we did a pretty good job picking up not only where we would see them, but also where we would not see them. So we can say, well, is that just the same as the long-term average? And so Elizabeth also has compared the average model, remember that layering that I showed you in the previous slide, which is on the left, that shows the average predicted Dall's porpoise density from 91 to 2005, And superimposed on that are the transect lines for 2008 and the Dall's porpoise sightings that were realized in 2008. And it's not bad, but it's not that great. On the right-hand side, what we have in contrast are using those daily grist sea surface temperature images, what we would have predicted for 2008 using the real-time data. And you can see in particular that just north of 40, 41 degrees off the Northern California coastline, we very accurately predicted that that would be a large concentration there. So these do seem to have a better ability to resolve some of the current conditions. The forecast models use the regional ocean circulation models, and what we did here was use a forecast that was developed from this model in July, predicting ocean circulation parameters, including in this case sea surface temperature, for October and November. So it was a 3 to 4 month forecast. And using those forecasts as inputs into the model, we predicted where we would expect to see animals, and then again looked at where the survey tracks went. And so those lines now show 1 month worth of survey tracks. On the left is October, and on the right is November, and again realized sightings along with the predictions. So we can see that the striped dolphins were seen in sort of the warmer colors and on the edge of those, and not in the blue colors where we have lower prediction. Similar plot for fin whales. Again, the survey tracks didn't go everywhere that we had high predictions, but most of the sightings were in areas of relatively high prediction. And the areas where you see the blues and the cooler tones, we tend not to have sightings. So this is encouraging because this is a 3 to 4 month forecast. And we're very encouraged by this, but we do want to have more sophisticated measures. These were the easy species because they have nice relationships with sea surface temperature, and we really like to be able to get some more products, mixed layer depth and other things that are a little bit closer to the actual trophic linkages that we observe. So I just want to conclude on I hope I've showed you some of the environmental variability. Again, there's a lot more detail in the reports and papers that I had on that earlier slide. But cetaceans are highly mobile. Their distributions change on seasonal, interannual, and decadal timescales, often in similar ways. The seasonal signal is mirrored during an El Nino, La Nina event, and during decadal scale, well, we don't have enough data yet to really examine that quantitatively. But the challenge, and this is really the question that I'd like to sort of pose for people to think about maybe in the panel discussion, is how can we predict these species distributions, identify population trends correctly, like the blue whales that just weren't in the study area. If we look at only the abundance, it looks like they're declining. Even from these surveys, it looks like they're declining. But in fact, the photo ID work shows that they're not declining. And how can we manage threats in a changing climate? Just like the anchovies and sardines are changing their distributions, the animals that are feeding on them are changing their distributions, and that can expose them to different types of threats and different intensities of threats. And so this is, to me, one of the biggest challenges in terms of managing cetacean species in a changing climate. Thank you.